when you've practiced intermittent fasting, are you a 8-16 kind of person? Are you a 12-12? Are you a 16-8? What is the best thing for you? And then also maybe almost describe how is it different for men and for women?
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I'm very much an intuitive faster. So I fast based on how I feel, how hard I've worked out at the gym, how good is my sleep. Because the one thing about intermittent fasting that we haven't mentioned is that it's a hormetic stress. Mm-hmm. So just like exercise, cold exposure, heat exposure, et cetera, it is hormetic stress for the body. So it's figuring out, where is your where do you need to be challenged? That is that role of hormetic stress, beneficial stress in the right amount at the right time. And so when I'm thinking about men versus women, obviously women are a little more complicated because they have cycles, up until they go through menopause. Menopausal women who've gone more than 12 months out of the menstrual cycle have a much easier time with intermittent fasting. I'll just make that blanket statement. Women in peak cycling years, so 35 and under, even if they're choosing not to have children at that point in time, or they're not choosing to have children at all, their body is exquisitely sensitive to the cues of nutrition and when they're eating and when they're not eating. So these women I tend to be more cautious with, especially if they are lean and active, because again, it's that hormetic stress, a little bit, right amount of stress at the right time in the right frame of mind. So when I'm thinking about these women, and even perimenopausal women, there are times in a menstrual cycle when women can kind of capitalize on fasting. And so this is the follicular phase when estrogen predominates. Again, big oversimplification. Day 1 of bleed week up until ovulation, day 14, if you have a perfect 28-day cycle. When estrogen predominates, this is when women can get away with a bit more fasting, more intense exercise. If they want to go lower carbohydrate or even ketogenic, they can get away with it. Estrogen is more insulin sensitizing. It is also the hormone that allows us to have a little bit more hormetic stress on board. Versus, in luteal phase, when women are progesterone predominates, and as they're getting closer to menstruation, if they have a 28, 30-day cycle, I usually say the last 5 to 7 days of their cycle, that's not the time to be pushing the fasting. Maybe they're doing 12 hours of digestive rest. That typically works well. So that's women in peak childbearing ages. Then perimenopause and menopause, here are the qualifiers. Got to sleep. Mm-hmm. Women become less stress resilient at this time in their lives. So what do most women do in perimenopause when they become weight loss resistant? They go harder, more fasting, more exercise, more food restriction, exactly, which just makes it worse. So the same thing applies in terms of where they are in their cycles, but then it's what's your stress like? Are you sleeping? Anti-inflammatory nutrition, because all of a sudden the foods you got away with eating in your 20s and 30s, it isn't quite so easy anymore. So sometimes women need to remove gluten or dairy or alcohol or sugar, really depends on the individual. And then really looking at strength training, because north of 40, we are losing muscle mass. Sarcopenia is a real thing, muscle loss with aging. And so I oftentimes will remind individuals that this is the time to make sure you're not doing an excessive amount of HIIT or chronic cardio. This is the time to be doing the weight training. And if you don't know how to do the weight training, make sure you hire someone that can work with you. And then menopause, 12 months out of menstrual cycle, women, there's not as much hormonal flux. The stress, the sleep, the nutrition, the exercise piece still applies, but those women tend to have a much easier time. And I would say menopausal women and men, much easier, and the rest of them have to work around their cycle. Now, unfortunately, what I find is a lot of the, whether it's the bro science, culture, or the toxic diet culture that women kind of lean into, there are a lot of people out there that hide their eating disorders and intermittent fasting. So there's always that caveat of being conscientious that you're eating. Like some people take fasting to an extreme, and I'm like, I'm not saying don't eat. I'm just saying eat less often. So making sure people are able to make that distinction.